Welcome back to the Capital Confidential podcast from the Times-Union and the Hearst Corporation. I'm Dan Clark, author of the Capital Confidential newsletter. We are right at the end of apple picking season in New York, a tradition that a lot of us take part in every year. New York is actually the second top apple producing state in the country, and we have farmers to thank for that. We also have a lot of other things to thank them for, like the milk in our fridge, the grapes in our wine, and the cannabis that I'm sure that you don't own. But farms are having a tough go of it at the moment for several reasons. We're going to talk about them this week with Renee St, the policy director at the New York Farm Bureau. Renee, thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me.
I hope I said your last name right, St. Jacques.
Yes, you said it perfectly.
Good.
Thank
Perfect.
you. Not everyone does.
Well, so when I look at farms, it's such a wide policy area, right? Because you have the financial side and you have the environmental side and you have like the livestock side, so many different parts. What do you see as like the top one or two challenges that New York farmers are facing right now?
I'd say one or two, probably the challenges that don't change, they're the same every year, is weather. The weather is a challenge. And certainly this year with our very rainy spring, it was hard to plant, hard to get the seeds in the ground, and then very dry summer, fall, and very difficult for harvest. And so you might see that the apples might be a little smaller in some areas of the state. I was told by farmers that's because of the dry season. So weather is always on top of my mind, and it's a risk.
Right.
And so I think that's the most difficult part, and one of the biggest challenges of farming is the risk that you're taking. Every time you're raising livestock, are things going to go the way you want this year? Are you going to be able to support and raise those livestock in a good, healthy way? But then also, what's your cost to doing that? Are you going to be able to make ends meet at the end of the day?
And like, will a bird flu wipe out all of your chickens?
Yeah. Yep. And then on the crop side, I mean, you're planting something and maybe doing everything you can to ensure that you have a good harvest, but weather might impact that.
Yeah.
So I think the risk is what's hard about farming, but hopefully that's what we ask the state and the federal government to help mitigate those risks. And so I'd say those two, and then more recent years, labor costs, of course, those are the highest cost doing business in most farms. But like you said, there's different farms across the state. For New York Farm Bureau, we try to represent everyone, and that means every commodity, every type of farm, whether it's a smaller farm, medium size, large farm, all size farms, we want to support everyone and the business that's going to work for them.
And we have farmers, experiencing this on a statewide basis of, I don't want to say farms are in decline because I don't think farms are in decline, but the number of farms drops, and I hate that. Is that just because they can't stay open because of those costs? Is it that they're being bought by other farms, or is there something else going on? I mean, is that just the trend that happens to be happening right now?
Yeah, unfortunately, that's what we see in our state. We see across the United States is that there is a decline in the number of farms. But in some commodities, take dairy, for instance, there's a decline in the number of dairy farms, but the number of cows is pretty much the same in the state, or increasing. And so you are seeing that consolidation. But I think one of the biggest drivers of losing our farms is the cost of doing business. And if you can't run a financially viable business, why stay farming? I mean, That's what farms are, is they're businesses first and foremost. And you'll see a lot of people will try to have off-farm jobs to support the farming, like we say something, and they really shouldn't have to do that because farms play an important role. They're producing the food that we need for everyone across the United States, and then nationally and around the world. And so why can't farms be a viable business? Yeah. And I think that's something that we try to find answers for and share those with our state, our leaders, our legislators, and what they can do to help. But there's more regulation. So when you think about it, like you said before, with farming, you have to wear many hats. So you have to be good at finance. You have to be good at human resources because you're You have labor, you have people working for you, you have to be able to fix things at a moment's notice, have to be a mechanic. I mean, all these different roles that farmers have to play. And so almost it's more complicated than maybe some other businesses.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. You're everywhere, right? Like and farmers aren't people who are just running the business at the top. They're people who also go into their farm and do the work too. What are the lowest hanging fruits? No pun intended, I guess, to solve that farm cost problem? Is it, higher prices at the store? Is it somehow lowering labor costs? But I don't know how you do that either.
I think we saw at least a few years ago with the overtime bill, having to pay overtime. The state did do the overtime tax credit, and we're seeing how that's working out. It's too soon to say at this point, but that was a way to try and mitigate that cost that was going to raise labor costs for farms. But then we look at regulations that come out on the state and federal level, but particularly more recently on the state level, the Department of Environmental Conservation had put out the emissions reporting,
right?
And which farms are a part of that reporting, depending on how many livestock you have. That's an added cost to do another type of reporting that they're going to have to do. And so I think that's something to keep in mind when our leaders are talking about new regulation and new laws, is that how is this going to be implemented in a way that isn't going to create more unnecessary risk or costs, burden of costs to our farmers? How can we implement this in a way with incentives, maybe, instead of just saying you have to do this, but let's take an incentive-based approach. So I think that those are things to keep in mind. And one thing that we are pushing for the next session, we have pushed for the last few sessions, state sessions, is a clean fuel standard.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we've been talking about that for years.
Yeah.
I want to get to that. But first, I want to circle back on emissions because this is really interesting to me. With the emissions reporting, will farmers have to report emissions just from their equipment, or is it from livestock as well? Because cows have emissions, obviously. How does that factor into the business? Like, is that something that the state might crack down on and say, like, hey, we need to somehow lower emissions from dairy farms?
Well, honestly, emissions are already lowering from dairy farms. They're already doing that. And Cornell Cows has been, and their pro-dairy team has been really helpful in helping where our dairy farms are already doing that. But that emissions reporting is based on how many cows have at this point. I mean, that regulation has been put out and we've commented on it. We'll see where it ends up. But a part of our comments were, okay, so how are farmers going to look at this regulation and say, all right, do I have to report? Do I not have to report? How do I calculate the emissions? And what's to say that this information that's being calculated and being brought in, is that going to be helpful at all? Or is it just another thing that is going to be put in a book somewhere and say, oh, we did that, right, and then leave it at that? And something we've talked with the pro-dairy team at Cornell and researchers to figure out a better way to calculate to make sure that we're getting the good information. Already are some of our dairy farms who have the CAFO permits, they're already doing some of this reporting. So why not use that information, which DC didn't include in the regulation, that why don't we already use the reporting that's being done by these dairy farms for the CAFO permits, instead of adding more reporting. Right.
Nothing's worse in government than when things double up, And I come across this in my job all the time as a reporter of, there's this data set here, and then somebody says, oh, we need to gather this data. And I'm always like, well, somebody already has. And they're like, oh, it's not good enough. Like sometimes I feel like we are missing the forest for the trees, if that's a saying. Okay, let's circle back to clean fuel standards. So this is something that's been talked about not just for farms, obviously, for anything that uses fossil fuels. Having a standard where the fuels that we use may be, emissions creating fuels, but on a cleaner basis. So what would that look like?
Well, if that clean fuel standard would create a regional market. Right now there are digesters on dairy farms that are creating biomethane that's being used for replacing diesel.
Can you explain what a digester is?
So the anaerobic digesters on our dairy farms, and they're not on all dairy farms, they're only on some.
Right.
But the ones that are used, you're putting in the manure into huge, container is probably the best description of it. You're putting that, and then also food waste. So food scraps, the farms are taking those from nearby facilities, nearby grocery stores, and putting that all in, taking the oxygen out, and then all of that breaks down and turns into a biogas, which then can be converted. Maybe it can go into the electric grid. It can be produced, go into biomethane, and then go for a biofuel. And so farms are already doing this, and it's a whole cycle. And so they can take also some of that, what's left over too, can be used back on for fertilizer that's coming out. So it's already happening, but unfortunately the credits when it comes to renewable energy are, you can't do that in New York. It's not. And so California has a clean fuel standard. And I find it really funny that usually New York likes to do what California does, or likes to be first before California. And yet California already has this clean fuel standard. And that's where the credits are going. And so if we can create a market for this, we can have more dairy farms in New York that have these digesters. They can take the manure, but also the more food waste, which is not going into a landfill then, and making a biofuel that can be then replacing diesel, for one example. It's amazing. Pretty amazing, right?
Yeah.
And it's a full circle. So I mean, one of the cool statistics that Cornell Cows came up with is that biomethane from our digesters, that could fuel over 30,000 tractor trailers annually. That's a lot.
Just from the ones that already exist.
Yeah. So it has potential. And if more farms are adding these digesters, it has the potential to do a lot of good. And I think what's being held up with the clean fuel standard is that it passes the Senate every year. It's held up in the Assembly. We're urging the governor, why not put that in her State of the State address and their executive budget proposal and get the ball rolling. I think there was some hesitation in the past maybe because the climate goals were, let's just focus on electricity. Let's focus on solar and wind.
Right.
And not give in to some of these other this fuel standard. And I think the state seems to be moving in the direction, especially with the latest New York State energy plan that was proposed.
Right.
They talk about biofuels a little bit more, biogas. So it seems to be leaning in that direction, that they're realizing, well, why don't we support this opportunity? And we're not going to be able to electrify everything, especially in the transportation sector. So I think that this is a good opportunity to use something that's already being done. And
otherwise, correct me if I'm wrong, but otherwise you would have all the manure and food scraps just creating emissions anyway. Mm-hmm. So it feels like a win-win. I don't know. I don't drive a tractor trailer, so I have no idea. I want to get into, you mentioned fertilizer, and I want to get into that, but first we're going to take a quick break.
Okay.
In July of 1908, America was transfixed by the murder of a young woman in upstate New York.
Either Hazel came down here alive or dead. We don't know.
Oh.
I think she was alive.
She was found floating in a country pond, her death shrouded in mystery, her killer unknown. Was she murdered by a spurned lover? Was she leading a secret double life outside of her station as a governess to the wealthy residents of Troy, New York? Did she know too many secrets?
She was obviously trying to create a better life for herself, and she knew how to maneuver to make it work for her, and it worked until it didn't.
In this new limited series podcast from the Times-Union, we'll go back in time to an era of wealth and prosperity, of rampant political corruption, and of secrets and lies in upstate New York. We'll unravel the mystery of the life and death of one young woman and why her story still resonates more than a century later.
'Tis the last rose of summer left blooming alone.
Listen to The Girl in the Pond at timesunion.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
If you're enjoying this podcast, take advantage of all the Times Union has to offer and support our efforts to bring you award-winning journalism by becoming a Times Union subscriber today. Go to timesunion.com/subscribe.
We are back on the Capital Confidential podcast with Renee St. Jacques from the New York Farm Bureau. So I mentioned fertilizer before we took a quick break. Fertilizer, potash from Canada was subject to tariffs, if I'm not mistaken. Have tariffs really impacted farms, or has it been kind of a wash for them?
I think it's created uncertainty.
Yeah.
And we have seen some impacts. We did ask our farmers to let us know when they see those impacts, or if it's impacting what they're thinking about buying, or it's been a little here, a little there. It hasn't been consistent as far as the impact across the board when it comes to agriculture. Certainly that uncertainty has been there, but farmers also really want fair trade.
Yeah.
And so if this leads to the end to more markets, to better markets and supporting our existing markets eventually, then they're okay with that. But I think the uncertainty is still out there, and as you see, it changes every day. So we've been watching those changes and making sure our farmers are aware of it. But it's certainly something that we're watching, and I'm hoping for the best as we go forward.
It's got to be tough for farmers because, to circle all the way back, farmers already deal with so much uncertainty. I would have overwhelming anxiety if I was a farmer, not knowing what the weather of the season was going to be. Like if what I'm planting in, March, April, I don't know if that's a planting season, I hope it is. If I was planting them knowing that crop could be totally wiped out by something, I would be terrified. I really tip my hat to them. It has got to be so difficult.
It is. And, but what helps in mitigating risk? And that's when hopefully our federal government will help mitigate those risks for our state government. That's our state budget. There's so much research money in our state budget. And I know that we're hearing that it'll be difficult next legislative session for the budget. And we have a lot of agricultural funding that is so important for that research side, so that farmers have enough information to mitigate the risks.
Right.
And it might not solve every problem, but certainly Cornell Cows does a lot for us. And I can't imagine if we didn't have the funding for research that they need to do. And it's so different, but they're our land-grant university. And I know they're one of the Ivy League colleges, but they're the only land grant. They're the only Ivy League that is a land grant university, and it needs to stay that way for New York. We can't take them for granted. And so, but I'll mention too with the budget funding, it's Cornell's doing research, but then we have promotion of different commodities. We have health and safety programs. We have farmland protection through the Environmental Protection Fund, the EPF. So there's a lot of good funding in the state budget that is critical for agriculture. And I think that that's really what helps us in the end to mitigate those risks when it comes for farmers.
100%. I think a lot of the time, a big challenge that farmers face is the supply versus the demand, right? Mm-hmm. Especially dairy farmers. Oh my goodness. It's such a tough economy to deal with. Just as an aside, the milk transition of the country. I have no, like, I've been dying to talk to a dairy farmer about, because I only drink oat milk now and I feel terrible about it. But dairy milk just upsets my stomach. Mm-hmm. Anyway, to get back on track.
And you're not alone in that. And I think that the dairy industry is still filling a void, though. I think that there's still a need, and as much as it's changed throughout the years. I mean, look at the production. I mean, the processing that's coming to New York. Yeah. Through the different new processing facilities. So, as much as maybe there are some people who cannot drink the regular milk, there's still a demand for it, which I think is really great, and it's a demand for all different commodities across the board. I think that in itself hasn't changed throughout the years, and there might be some commodities that have more popular than others each year, but in the end, I've really seen it even out, and people are going to the farmers markets too and picking their favorite thing. But I think everything has a chance. Every commodity has a chance to thrive in New York, which makes us very different from other states.
I think so too. I get the sense among people, at least in my life and the people that I talk to in the public, that there is this appetite, pun intended again, appetite for local products. Like, people really want to feel connected to their communities. Mm-hmm. I think, especially after the pandemic of like a time of such isolation, mm-hmm. people just want to reconnect. And farmers markets are such a good way to do that. And apple picking at your local farm, great. Yeah. Pumpkin patches, amazing. I want to end with a little bit more of a serious subject, and that's the workforce issue. We have these immigration raids around the country. How has that impacted New York's farms? The last time that I talked about this with someone, I was talking to the state ag commissioner, and he said essentially that what you said about tariffs is that there's a lot of uncertainty, and that's the concern, really. So how are farmers coping?
They're doing the best they can. They're very resilient, and I say that about farmers, anyone who works on farms. So our farm employers and employees are resilient. And I think that, like you said, the uncertainty of going forward of our labor workforce, because as much as people say, oh, anyone can work on a farm, like, no, really, you need to have certain skills. Right. And a lot of our Americans don't want to work on farms. And so where do we fill those gaps? And I know a lot of our farms have the ability to use the H-2A program and utilize that, but then there's other types of farms that are year-long work, like our dairy farms, and they cannot utilize that program. So I think it's important to keep in mind that those issues with workforce and trying to make sure that we have the next generations also who want to take over the farms. That's also an issue. And is the farm business going to be viable for them enough to take it over from their farm family? Are there also people who want to get into farming, and so they need help finding land or connecting with a farmer who is ready to retire? So all of that is part of what, for New York Farm Bureau, we try to support our membership and our members who want to ensure that agriculture is just as good or better in the future. And that means having people who are interested in agricultural careers as well, because it's not just farming that you need. When you're looking at an agricultural career, it can be all sorts of things. Research, it can be, you can working with soil, you can be a crop advisor, all these different things. And so, and I know that one thing I want to make sure is said is that our farmers, our farm employers really care about their employees, because if they don't have people working on farms, what do you do then? I want to make sure that that's known, that people really care about their employees, and they want to make sure that they're safe and they're healthy and they're having a good life and working on the farm and are able to support their families no matter where their families live.
Absolutely, 100%. You said something, last question. You said something that made me think of solar panels. Are they bad or good for farms? Here's the thing. When solar panels started to get popular, I thought that they were going to be good for farms, because farms could lease land that maybe they don't use because there's not such a demand. But then you have the problem of maybe farmers getting coerced into these deals, or maybe it being what they have to do. to stay viable. What do you think?
It is a controversial issue, especially even among our members, because our farmers, members of New York Farm Bureau, vote on policy each year. So right now they're voting on saying we should support this, New York Farm Bureau should oppose that, and that can change every year. And on solar, there's always a huge discussion at our convention about solar, because we are losing we're losing our agricultural land to solar.
Yeah.
And you don't always get that agricultural land, those good soils back. And so, but we also at New York Farm Bureau have policies supporting the farmer's right to put solar on their farmland. If that's what's going to help them keep their business viable, then that's their right to do that. But to try and incentivize also not putting it on good soils. And there is talk about agrivoltaics right now, which is the dual farming and having solar panels on land. We don't have policy yet on that for New York Farm Bureau. So it'll be interesting when our county farm bureaus meet this month and put forward policy to our state convention. They then send voting delegates from each county, just like the legislature. They go to state convention and debate these policies on the floor and vote on them. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, that's really cool.
And so they're agrivoltaics, solar, that's something that they're talking about right now. So at this point, I don't know where our members stand on it, which is, I think, pretty cool about our organization. That's what I love about my job, is that I take it right from the farmers who are voting in the democratic process. It's not just a small policy committee or executive or board that's making the decisions on what we support and oppose. It's the farmers, and it can change every year depending on how they're doing and which the majority of our membership feels each year. And so I think that's what makes it New York Farm Bureau pretty different.
I love that. I love democracy. All right, well, we will leave it there. Renee St. Jacques, Director of Policy at the New York Farm Bureau, thank you so much for joining the CapCon pod. If you want to learn more about New York State politics and government, head on over to capitalconfidential.com. That's our website. It's Capital Confidential with an O. Our theme music is DM by Easy Hike, or Easy Hike by DM. I always get it mixed up. Our editor is Jessica Marshall. We'll see you next time. Be well.